Latin and the Evolution of the English Language by Sarah, Joshua, Nicole, and Tree. The English language has been influenced over thousands of years to become the language we speak today. The story of the English language began when West Germanic invaders, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, populated the British Isles in the 5th and 6th century. They spoke a mutually intelligible language called Old English, which is part of the Indo-European family that includes languages like Latin, Germanic, and Slavic. Throughout history, several languages have had large impacts on the English language. Today we will be analyzing the impact of Latin on English during a time span lasting around 1,000 years. Two historical periods have been especially important to Latin's influence on English. First, the spread of Christianity to Great Britain led to many religious Latin words being incorporated into English. Secondly, the Renaissance, a period between 14,000 and 16,000 AD, when people looked to Latin and Greek words for education, added thousands of new Latin-based words to the English vocabulary. In 55 BC, the Romans invaded Britain, beginning Latin's influence on the English language. Around 450 Old English words, mainly nouns, were added, taken directly from Latin. Latin's influence on English can be split into three main groups or phases. The first phase was prior to the arrival of Anglo-Saxons in England. It arose from contact between West Germanic-speaking people and Latin speakers. After the West Germanic peoples invaded Great Britain, four main dialects of English arose: Northumbrian in the north, American in the Midlands, West Saxon in the southwest, and Kentish in the southeast. People speaking one dialect could understand dialects similar to theirs. The little writing that was done before Christianization was done with runic letters. Old English adopted the Latin alphabet, with slight modifications and retentions of certain letters. This first period of Latin borrowing was mainly about household items and warfare. There were many words relating to war that were incorporated from Latin into English during this first period. The Latin word campus became the English word battle. The Latin word pilum became the English word javelin. Strata became road, and milia became mile. There are also many Latin words related to trade that were incorporated. Calpo became bargain, pondo became pound, winum became wine, and moneta became mint or coin. Several words about domestic life were taken from Latin as well. Cuppa turned into cup, discus into dish, pulvinus into pillow, coquina into kitchen, linum into linen, and gemma turned into gem. There are also many Latin words associated with food that were taken and turned into English words. The Latin word caesus was borrowed and turned into cheese. Buttram became butter. Piper became pepper. Sinapi became mustard. Cesaris became cherry. Pisum became pea. And mentha became mint. Some other words include mull, which became mule, pipe, which stayed as pipe, and Christ, which turned into church. The second period occurred when Anglo-Saxons arrived in England up to their Christianization and took place from 600 to 650 AD. This period of Latin influence had less borrowings, but had more words relating to religion and learning than the first. The third and final period of Latin influence was from the time of the Anglo-Saxons' Christianization up to the arrival of Normans in 1066. During this period, English gained more Latin words related to religion and learning. With the establishment of Christianity came with the building of churches and monasteries. The Bible had been written in Latin up to this point, so with Christianity's spread to Great Britain, it was translated into English. Oftentimes, translators would keep a Latin word while translating the Bible to English if there was no English equivalent of the word. Some words adopted in this period include angels, disciple, litany, martyr, mass, shrift, and shrine. Some other church-related words adopted in this period include disciple, shrine, priest, and bishop.
In the first century, most people believed in either pagan gods or Roman gods. Christianity arrived in Britain long before Augustine brought it in 597 AD. It is believed that Christianity arrived in the first century, but there wasn't a lot of public effort to convert people, and only a small following developed. It began with traders and artisans coming to Britain and spreading the story of Jesus. Because followers of Christianity were instructed not to follow any other gods, it threatened authority. Therefore, Christians were forced to practice in secrecy, even being persecuted by Roman authorities. After Constantine converted, Christianity was tolerated, but throughout the 4th century, Christianity became more prominent, but it was still considered a small faith. After Rome fell, there were new invaders, the Anglo-Saxons and Jews. It was thought that Christianity would not be able to survive, but it managed to hang on, living on the western edges of Britain. In 597 AD, Augustine came, increasing Christianity's following massively. But in 871 AD, the Viking invasion of Lindisfarne threatened Christianity's rise. The Vikings destroyed churches and monasteries, leading priests to run away. Then, King Alfred of Wessex saw these attacks as a punishment from God, and decided to create a new system to spread Christianity and get more followers. Alfred's new system involved teaching the illiterate country people about Christianity. In the 10th century, lords started providing chapels on their land, offering easier access for ordinary people to worship. Churches were also used as venues for entertainment, schools, marketplaces, as a way to get more people to convert.
The next wave of influence on the English language was not primarily based in Latin, but in French, which arrived with William the Conqueror in 1066. When the Anglo-Normans conquered England, they implemented their native language as the language of the aristocracy. Anglo-Normans spoke Old French, a dialect with Germanic influences and basic Latin roots, leading to an infusion of Latin into the English language. French words would replace Old English words, combine to form a new word, or two different words would develop similar in meaning, but often with a class distinction. For example, beef, derived from the French word for cow and beef, boeuf, is an Anglo-Norman word that was used by aristocracy for the meat they ate. However, cow was used by the commoners who spoke English. Over the course of 600 years of Scandinavian influence, English adopted thousands of words from Norman French, Latin, and the grammar changed radically. In addition, many legal terms have Anglo-Norman roots because the Anglo-Normans ran the court system in England. French and Latin were used in the church, government, and education systems for 3 centuries, as it was considered the language of the educated. In 1204 AD, King John lost the province of Normandy to the King of France, leading to a split between Norman nobles and their French cousins. The nobles cut ties with their estates in France and focused on their estates in England. By now, the nobility had adopted a modified version of English, and French had faded away. Another event that impacted Middle English was the Black Death, which arrived in England in 1348 and killed 1/3 of the English population. The decrease in population made the poor and merchants more important in society, causing their version of English to become more important than before in comparison to the Anglo-Norman version.
The Renaissance originated in Italy for many reasons. First, Italy, which was situated on top of the Roman civilization. Second, it had an influx of Greek scholars from the Byzantine Empire that migrated to Italy after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. In addition, Italy traded with the Ottoman Empire. This led to a rise of interest in Greek and Roman culture in Italy, whose urban culture supported the Renaissance, due to the Medici family patronizing the arts. In 1494, after the French conquest of Italy, marked the beginning of the Northern Renaissance, where influence of Greek and Roman culture could be found in writing. England was one of the countries affected by the Northern Renaissance, and like all other countries, they began writing in vernacular instead of Latin. The Renaissance signaled the transition from the Middle English to early modern English, which was marked by 3 events: the Great Vowel Shift, the invention of the printing press, and the spread of new learning. Around 1350, there was a vowel shift in the English language known as the Great Vowel Shift. The Great Vowel Shift was a gradual process lasting over 200 years, which shifted the phonetic values of the long vowels, making them shorter or silent, changing the pronunciation of words. The long vowel sounds were higher in the mouth, and the letter E at the end of the word became silent. Vowel sounds are still shortening today, but at a much slower rate than during the vowel shift. Many factors, including the invention of the printing press, made London, England, the standard dialect throughout Britain, and other dialects were stigmatized, indicating a lack of education.
Prior to the printing press, books were handwritten, mostly by monks who wrote in Latin. After the invention of the printing press, the production of English books and dictionaries in the 1500s accelerated, increasing the education of the middle class and presenting a standard version of English. The first educational book was published in 1531 and influenced the English language as it contained new words, specifically Latin ones. The word order became fixed in a subject-verb-object pattern, and an auxiliary verb system arose in English. In 1611, the King James Bible was published, which is currently used in many English churches today. Translating the Bible from Latin to English was challenging, since there were some words that didn't have a good English equivalent. Therefore, some words in the King James Bible has Latin roots in them. The additions to the English language during the English Renaissance did not result from invasion, an influx of new nationalities, or top-down decrees. Instead, these additions were deliberately borrowed, because Latin was considered the language of education. Therefore, as many classical works were translated into English, whole Latin and Greek words were imported because they did not have an English equivalent. A whole new categories of word ending with Greek-based suffixes IZE and ISM were introduced. Many other words were slightly altered, such as the word horrid, pathetic, system, and expensive. Latin-based adjectives were introduced to plug lexical gaps when no adjectives were available for an existing German noun, and French phrases were naturalized in English. The Renaissance was also a time of scientific revolution, and words were added to the English language to reflect the discoveries. Many words came from Latin, such as atmosphere, pneumonia, and skeleton. For example, Galileo's discoveries led to the word encyclopedia, explain, and gravity. Berzelius's discoveries led to words such as strenuous and excrement, and Gilbert's discoveries led to the words such as paradox, eternal, and chronology. Overall, the period of the Renaissance added 10 to 12,000 words to the lexicon. However, there was not a systematic way in which these words died or survived. For example, take the words impede and expede. Today, we still use these words. However, we no longer use the word impedite. Therefore, some of us may conclude that short words are preferred over long words. However, we cannot make a conclusion that short words are preferred because the word expedite survived. In addition, words sometimes join languages even though a similar word and meaning exists. Sometimes words are still lost when there are similar words and meanings, such as demit, even though it shares the same roots as transmit and remit from the Latin verb mitter.
In the beginning of the 16th century, there weren't many reformers. The prevailing religion at this time was medieval Catholicism. There are some rumors of corruption in the church. The reason for reformers wanting to change is because Henry VIII wanted a divorce from his wife at the time and wanted to remarry, but the Pope said no, so Henry broke England off from the rest of the country and endorsed some changes in the religion, but the reformers still wanted more change. Some changes made to Christianity were Bibles in English. Before, all Bibles were in Latin and required a priest to translate. There was a lot of change under Henry VIII's son, Edward VI, who was a Protestant educated. Edward VI changed Mass. He abolished sacraments of penance and the last rites of the dead. He also declared that purgatory did not exist and that praying for the dead was useless. Edward VI died 6 years later after his coronation. Then, his half-sister Mary turned the country back to Catholicism, undoing many of Edward VI's changes.
When the Normans conquered England, they brought in French influence into the English language. The Renaissance brought in Latin and Greek influence in the English language afterwards. However, many of the words that were influenced by French, Latin, and Greek are words that we rarely use in informal everyday speaking. The next time someone says "speak English" to you, you get away by speaking Latin.